Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna call this meeting to order. We're gonna hear about the Georgia Regional Seed Grant Program. Hopefully we have some great ideas about some implementation funds that we might be able to conjure up here in South Carolina. Continue to develop our technical policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations, and get an update on the chapters. So we've seen chapter 2, I guess, in draft, and chapter 3 as well. And we're going to review those briefly. Do I have a do I need a motion to approve the agenda? I'm sorry.
No, the agenda. The agenda.
All right. Oh, there it is. Yeah, approval of the agenda. That is right. So I have somebody that'd like to make a motion to approve our agenda for today.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
Second.
Beautiful. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Our agenda stands and passes. We would have seen also the September minutes, September 11th minutes. Any changes or a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, those minutes stand and pass as well. And as usual, I pass all this housekeeping. If there's anything new that we need to touch on, housekeeping items for the day.
Not housekeeping, but newsworthy items. I think we'll talk a little bit about water SC and Joe Kuhn. You want to talk about that? I circulated Kuhn's executive order, which established its water SC group. Hope you all have read that. There's also a hard copy here. But Joe, I'll turn it over to you to give you the highlights of it.
Sure. So per the executive order by the governor, Water SC is a new working group. And so I think more or less it's replacing the Process Planning Advisory Committee, otherwise known as the PPAC. And so, DES is chairing that committee. Myra Reese is chairing that new working group, and we're busy planning our first meeting and, setting the members of that group. I think there's going to be 25 total members with 5 additional members from various agencies there as listed in the order, and up to 33 total. And so our first order of business is to develop a stakeholder engagement plan. So that's in the works. And then the second order of business would be to present some information in January of next year to the Standing Legislative Committee on Surface Water to shape policy there. And then lastly, to write a state water plan by the end of next year. So, we're kicking off the Santee Basin, the final basin in the 8 river basins here in South Carolina. And, we've got an ambitious schedule in front of us now. And so that's more or less what that's about. I'm glad to attempt to answer any questions if there are any.
Jill is going to be part of the water SC, correct?
Yes. As was mentioned, it's kind of PPAC 2.0. So any representatives on PPAC were asked if they were interested in engaging in this water SC. Since we haven't met yet, I actually don't know if every PPAC member gave the nod and said they do want to, and then there'll be 5 more. We don't have we haven't gotten a lot of information yet, so I don't have a lot to elaborate on, to be honest with you.
So this organization feeds to death. Is that the idea?
I'm sorry.
I said this organization feeds information.
Yeah, so the RBCs, as structured currently and moving forward, I would say they largely go unchanged. I think business will continue. Basin plans will be completed. Remaining this year and going into next year, many of the basin plans that are ongoing will be completed. And then I think this working group, which is chaired by DES, will roll all that information up into a state water plan. So I think more or less that was the plan to begin with. I think this order just clarifies the new working group and adjusts the schedule.
So I think recommendations from each one of the RBCs, the group will help consolidate and figure out which ones move up and make it onto the state water plan and which ones are maybe local regional issues that should be addressed in the river basins, so probably as part of the effort. as well as probably talking a little bit about, the water law as well. That's gonna be something that's probably a component of it, but how deep without having the detail.
Yeah, I mean, the way that's worded is this working group's tasked with coming up with a consensus-based approach on any new surface water law policy. And they are to report out to the standing surface water committee that was developed last legislative session. I believe they are to report out by March. So this working group would be providing information to them by the end of January.
Any other questions, Joe? Or Bill?
All right, thank you.
Yeah. In light of the, I would say urgency, but since the planning process schedule has been sped up a little bit and this Water SC is tasked with preparing a state water plan by the end of next year, we want to kind of move things along. So we don't want to rush you all, but we're getting close to the end anyway. So I want to show just kind of the plan, at least as it stands right now, so you understand what the expectations are for finishing up. We may go a little longer, but hopefully we can wrap up with our final public meeting by May. So that means this month we're working on recommendations. We'll probably start talking about policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations at the end of this meeting. If we can work through all the other ones, we'll have November to finalize recommendations. But I think between today and November.
I assume these aren't it should be, I think you're a year off, but you're giving us a little extra time.
Yeah, my head was somewhere when I wrote that. Sorry, 2024, 2025. Yeah, let's not extend this the extra year. Thanks. Daniel.
So how far off is this timeline compared to our previous timeline?
Well, this is pretty much what our previous timeline was going to be,
so-
right? But the point of showing this, give you an idea of when we expect to finish. I think the sooner that we can finish, the better it is for development of the state water plan, because I think to write that document, the Water SC group is going to have to start reviewing recommendations from each of the RBCs and other information and compiling that plan. And that's going to take a while. So the quicker we can finish up, the better it will help the process.
Perfect. Thank you.
The Saluda is pretty much on a similar timeline. They may finish up, at least the draft schedule I put together for their review shows them finishing up in April, so a month earlier. Or Savannah, Salcahatchee is probably going to be more like July or August, but we'll see what we can do. And then, of course, the Santee's got to start and finish all within next year, basically. But December, we'll work on the implementation plan. January, we'll finalize that. And then basically all that's left to do is to review the full draft plan. Between October and January, you're going to continue to get chapters. Chapter 4 has actually already been drafted and I need to do a final review of it. But I'm going to try to get that to you in the next week or two. You'll have that well before the next meeting. And at the end of this meeting, I'm going to go through the chapter review schedule with you, but you'll be given 3 weeks to do an initial review of each chapter and provide comments. And then you also get a chance to review the draft before we put it out for the public. So you'll have a couple opportunities, but we want to get your thorough review and most of your comments during this first round when you have the 3 weeks to review each chapter. I'm not going to go through chapter 2 and 3 because I think I gave you a quick overview of that last time. But again, the sooner the better. You can review that and send us comments. We're going to put all your comments in a log and we're going to say what we did to address them or if we just ignored them. And we'll tell you why we ignored them if that's the case. That usually doesn't happen, but we'll keep an ongoing log and we'll circulate that so you can kind of see others' comments. Any questions about the schedule? Tom?
Mac has his hand up.
Yeah, Mac, go ahead.
Yes, you have to unmute, sir.
Hang on. You got my audio now? Am I on?
Can hear you, yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm a little rusty on Zoom.
Good.
Question probably was for the other fellow, but okay. Gio, the Water SC, could somebody explain why we got what the catalyst was for all this rush and push we got to do all of a sudden? Or we ain't got enough information for that yet.
Yeah, Joe, what do you?
I mean, I don't know that I can clearly answer that question. That might be a better question for the governor's office. as he produced the executive order, but I think, you know, obviously water planning is an effort he wants to prioritize, so.
Okay, well, I just thought that's what we were doing. Yeah, Miss Chairwoman, I forget that information. I'd like to know who pulled the lever on this. Thank you.
I agree. After so many years of delay, expedited year, I'm not sure if it's gonna make or break state water planning, but I think it's, something obviously made it to his desk. Is probably the best way to put it. What that is, I don't know. That spurred him on to feel like, time was of the essence. I'll try and find out what that is for you, Mac, if I can.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thomas should have done, Sarah. Who else do we have online, by the way, from the RDC, just so we know about someone that's doing that?
Will Williams, Tony Bonatatabas, Alan Stewart, Mac.
Okay, good. Okay, any questions about the schedule? Don't think it's reasonable? We can do it. Too short, too long? Happy with it? Indifferent? I'm sensing indifference. Okay. Well, that's the plan.
Ignorance.
All right, public comment. Any members of the public that are present or online want to make comment? Nope.
May I ask, I just had a question and I should know the answer, so I completely apologize that I don't. I was just asked if we actually have a quorum since we have a smaller group here. I don't know what makes a quorum. Like I said, I apologize. I should, considering my role.
Yeah, we do. We have well over a quorum, and I can't
15
remember.
or 16 out of
Right.
20. So.
Is it a majority?
Just a simple majority. Yeah, yeah. Sorry. 17. Okay. Okay, no public comment. It sounds like no one raised their hand online. No, okay. Let's do a quick review of what we talked about last month, and then we'll get into Cleet's presentation.
So Tanya, or Winfrey should came on so she knows.
Oh, good. Welcome, Tanya. Last month, we spent most of our time talking about planning process recommendations. So we're going to pretty much move on from those, but I want to remind everybody what we agreed with and the language and the fact that we put them in those green buckets, which meant generally everybody was good with them, right? The first one had to do with increasing engagement. We had some good ideas about identifying target audiences and means and methods for engagement, leveraging existing mechanisms. So everybody's still happy with that, I'm assuming. We had another one about RBC composition, recruitment, meetings, and collaboration. First one was about making sure we've got representation from local government water interest category. And then the second one was about maintaining membership and sustaining the RBCs. I think we've talked about this before. In Georgia, they've struggled a little bit with that, but it's governor appointed rather than volunteer. And I think the volunteer process opens it up to more people. So hopefully we don't have the same issue that Georgia struggled with getting the governor's office to appoint folks. There seems to be still a lot of interest here. Another one about composition, recruitment, meetings, and collaboration. First one was about working with DES to identify scope of future RBC activities, funding needs and requests, and that's something that will probably be discussed as part of Water SC as the state water plan gets put together next year. Similarly with that second bullet, increasing collaboration between all South Carolina RBCs. So another one we all agreed on, and that was it for the planning process recommendations. I'll pull up Cleet's slide. You want to introduce Cleet?
All right, so next we have Cleet Barton. He's a regulatory support program manager with Georgia EPD's watershed protection and protection branch. So Cleet oversaw this last round of regional water plans, the revision and approval the last go round a little over a year ago, kind of a blur. But and I know we are at the point where we're getting into our planning process recommendations, and there's been a lot of chatter about, you know, implementation and funding and things of that nature. So we thought timing would be good to give you a little insight on what Georgia's doing as a part of the implementation. to support the planning process. So Clete, I can advance for you as you move through. Are you there?
Sure. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, sorry I couldn't be there in person today, guys. We're still dealing with the hurricane. Part of my job is to help support our state operations center. So we're still engaged with that with Helene, and we're getting prepared for the next one that's coming in as part of the Georgia coast. But hopefully I can maybe attend one of your next meetings in person. But I'm Clete Barton. I'm the Regulatory Support Program Manager for EPD. And so yeah, Ashley, if you go to the next slide, please.
Sure. I think I gotta tap it.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Okay. So give them kind of a brief history before we go into the sea grants of how our water planning history went into it. So in 2001, we created an act that was passed to create the Metro District in Atlanta for the water plan. And then that plan was passed. The first plan came into effect in 2003. And then we later created a statewide water plan through the success of the Metro plan. But we kind of realized that all didn't work. The water needs for Atlanta did not meet all the needs for the whole state of Georgia. So we passed in 2009 created 10 more regional water plan or councils, and then along with the Metro plan. So in 2011, those plans were adopted for the first time. And then to try to keep the Metro plan and the 10 other regional water plan, we try to get them on the same schedule. And all the plans were adopted in 2017. And we keep revising our plans every 5 years. And like Ashley said, we just finished the last plan revisions last year in 2023. So that's kind of just a brief history of ours, and how the councils are broken up, kind of going into river basins of our 14 major river basins. And then on the left, you kind of see our actual council regions. They kind of match up with our county boundaries along with the river basins there. That's kind of just a brief summary of how our councils are created and made up there. Actually, if you go to the next one. So with the sea grants in 2014, our DNR board passed a law that allowed us to create the sea grants. And what this does is kind of like a Kickstarter fund to allow local governments, local colleges, and other researchers to implement water plans into their system. We give $75,000 to these governments to come in and create a plan to implement their plans in. Like I said, it's kind of like a Kickstarter plan. So it's not something we keep funding the same project over and over, but we do give them money to kind of get it started and for water needs. And should we go to the next slide, please? So who we give the money to? I'm sorry. Again, this is it goes in to the water plans that has to be implemented for the regional water plans. The councils have to agree on those projects, and they usually give it for water quality and water supplies. Also, I'm sorry. They is trying to address the critical needs and data prepared, and any kind of
I'm sure he'll be back.
You want
Okay.
to try to keep going while he tries to get back in?
Yeah, I can take over while we wait for Clete to get back on.
It's froze and it drops.
Okay. So, yeah, so just kind of continuing on what Clete was addressing. And so basically, there has to be an endorsement from the council for these projects that are going before the application process. And there's a requirement for the applicant to have a pre-application meeting, and usually there's the chair or some representative from the council that meets alongside the Georgia EPD Sea Grant Coordinator, just to make sure that this project that's being applied for aligns well with the goals and the practices of that region's plan. And it is competitive, right? So there's only so much funding that's available for across all the regions. And so each region is kind of competing depending on, you know, how many are going before the application process. For instance, this year, the Savannah Upper UG region didn't have any to propose. It's, I think, the first time in a long time that Savannah Upper River Basin did not propose any. So just further leading into that, they require letters of support, again, being endorsed by the regional council. And sometimes it can be multiple councils that the project applies to. And so multiple endorsements from multiple councils, you know, is better. It looks better and as a stronger application, obviously. And this year, the application process has been moved to online. So there's an online application portal that makes it pretty seamless. And we're actually moving into the end of the application period in Georgia right now. It ends October 31st. And that's usually the cycle. Application period opens in July, closes in October, and announcements are made before the end of the year. Okay, so eligible applicants, we have, Clete mentioned this a little bit, but here more in detail: state agencies, city governments, regional commissions, soil and water conservation districts, resource conservation and development councils, community and business improvement districts, local and regional school systems, state colleges, universities. We see a lot of educational applicants. UGA has put forth a lot, and there's partnerships too, like UGA partners with Finney Center, and there's been partnerships with City of Augusta and so on and so forth. And we actually, I don't know if Tanya would be available, but she has an active project that she might want to give a.
Cleats rejoined.
Cleats rejoined,
May
okay.
need a second here to get up to speed.
Okay.
Cameron, I guess.
Do you want me to talk about it now, or you said wait?
I think, oh, Tanya, so we'll let Clete, I guess, if he can take it over from here. There's a point where he's gonna reference actually your project.
I'm sorry, everybody. My computer did an upgrade. I was trying to close out of it, and before it did it, and it cut me off of everything. Closed the whole computer down. I apologize about that.
No problem.
So, actually, if you'll go back a slide or two. Or three, right there. Yeah, sorry. I think this was where I was at. But the projects that we fund, we're looking for projects that are implementations to the actual regional water plan of what the councils are wanting to, their goals that they're trying to do. Usually that's for us, that is water quality or water supply needs. And then any kind of maybe research projects for technical assistance or any kind of other data that they may want to gather into according to their plan, that they're in their particular interest that are going on there. So the SIG grants to be able to apply, we do require that the councils actually write a letter of support for the grants, and that's something that a lot of our chairs take very seriously. They want to make sure that the grants that they're supporting are something that they're interested in, and that it's not something kind of off the wall, that they want to be something that is in their plan and that they agree with. Usually if we can get more than one council to write a letter of support, that goes a long way with our funding. Our applications, we process is usually from July through October. Mid-October, we required all the applicants to do a pre-app meeting. And that they come in with the council chair, their planning contractor. They'll usually meet with us and our grants program team. And then they'll come in, kind of give us an idea of what they're wanting to do, how they're getting their funding. And they come in together and they kind of break out the idea. We kind of give them some feedback of how they may better present to their council. I mean, to submit their grant application. Anything they can do to improve it. The final application is due at the end of October every year. And then we usually, there's a screening process that we go through internally that we score the applications. And then by usually around December, January-ish, we award those projects every year. And then we go through there's a website there that we make all of our applications go through. It kind of streamlines everything for us in that aspect. So who we give money to is usually state agencies or local governments, regional commissions, the soil and water conservation districts, like I said, colleges that can go into research projects, school systems, and any kind of community and business implications there. And I said, and we give, traditionally, we've been giving $75,000 per project. We budget out $300,000 that comes out from our Regional Water Planning Council budget. So we fund 4 projects. We can fund 4 projects at $75,000 each. The total cost of it, we will be up to 60%. So that 75,000 comes up to 60% of the total cost. So if the total cost of the project is 125,000, we will fund $75,000 to that. The applicants must match 40% of the total project cost, and of that 40%, 10% must come in cash form. So that can come into, for local governments, that can come into SPLOSH funds or, just out of their budget. But right now that is something that we're looking at, but change. But that 10% it was kind of there originally to make sure that the applicants were serious about their projects. The other 40% can come in as staffing funds or any kind of matches that they do. And our projects are limited to 30 months, so they have to complete the project within 30 months time. I will say that something we're considering changing is the amount. We've kind of found out that in today's time, $75,000 is not a whole lot of money to get projects going and started, but at the same time, 10% of that cash match is a lot of money for people to do. So we're considering changing the amount of the money, and also maybe doing away with the 10% cash match, because that's kind of seems to be a limiting factor that a lot of our applicants are telling us that they don't have that money to shell out right now, and that there's the $75,000 for the other projects isn't enough to get them up and going. So that is something that we're considering changing next year. Is kind of in our internal works right now. So next slide. This is kind of an overview of since 2014 the number of applicants that we have received total and how many we've funded. So we, depending on our budget that year, where we are in the planning process, and our and the quality of the applications that come in that year of how we funded them. We funded anywhere between 2 and I think in 2020 we funded 6 projects, but most of them is around 2 to 4 projects a year. And then kind of an overview of each of the 10 councils or regional councils that do the projects. We have some that are very active in our seed grant program. The Savannah Upper Ogeechee there is very active, and so is our Coosa, North Georgia, and our Lower Flint Lockney Council. They're the three most active and put in for the grants almost every year. And then we have some that just for some reason they're not as active putting in applicants in that area, not put in as much. So that's kind of just a brief overview of how much we spend for state funds and the cast matches and how much are granted to each of our 10 regions. And if you want more information, we do have a website for our seed grants. They can go through and apply there too as well. It's there. And then I know, is Tanya here today?
It's online, I think.
Okay. Awesome. Tanya, I know you had put in for several of our seed grant process. I didn't really want to speak too much and put some words in there, but I know that you had one of the two projects that you put in for one continuous project was the Know Your River database. It's a really nice database that you've created, and through the Savannah River Keeper there, and it's kind of a GIS database. You can go in and get some water quality data, real-time data that you're going through. Kind of just the fundings that we've provided through that one. And again, this was we funded it 2 years going through there, but the whole process and point of our seed grants is to get it started. So we got it going, and then I think Tanya has kept on working with this project. But if you want to, I don't know if you want to keep going to talk about anything about this at your project or not.
It's my favorite subject.
Okay.
I always want to talk about it. So a couple of things. The seed program is amazing. People don't use it enough. And I also think it's a fun fact that the 3 places that get the most grants are the ones where they have keepers that are regularly attending the coastal or the meetings. But the Know Your River started as a way to show and fill in gaps of data that existed on the river from a real-time standpoint, because there's used to be a couple of different real-time monitoring systems, but none of the data really has been publicly available. So it started as a data democratization site with the idea that we would make the data available for everybody. And then we asked the question, like, what data exists, and found over 30,000 sample points almost immediately from different parameters. And so it kind of shifted. And so now what is Know Your River has extended. We just turned on all of Alabama, which means I have the Chattahoochee, which is the most awesome to put all. So essentially what it does is it takes every data point that we can access, federal down to citizen. Everybody speaks a different language in the way that they formulate their Excel spreadsheets and what have you, and it makes it all speak Italian. So it speaks together, which allows you to then be able to analyze data in a completely different way than the kind of the tunnels. Now I think we'll have the money from NASA and EPA to turn on Region 4 soon. We're starting to add satellite data. There's just all this stuff, but that grant changed the way our entire organization functions and kind of what we think of as what our goals are, which is much more now giving tools to people and local governments to be able to do the job effectively that we want them to do. So the other thing is, in South Carolina versus Georgia, we have now 3 funds that are specifically for helping meet that cash match and that non-federal match. And they're all from lawsuits that Riverkeeper had that set aside different pots of funds at community foundations. So Foothills has one. Nobody's tapped into it. So if we had this program, we have a fund that would help you meet that non-federal. Same for, we have Anderson County and then Augusta to Savannah right now. I do have a gap. Anyways, I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, it's been a great project. So I didn't want to put words in your mouth by any means, and I figured you could explain it a whole lot better than I could.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of, I guess a brief overview. We do have internally the way that we process the grants. Like I said, I kind of oversee the council's aspect of it. And then we do have a grants unit who oversees our funding. And they handle all that. They're a great team. And so I've got our contact information for both of those for mine, contact information if you need me, or our grants unit manager is Joy Hinkle. And she is fantastic on answering any questions about funding, money, and and she actually handles all the application processes of it for our pre-app meetings and submitting all that stuff. I will also give them a huge pat on the back that during our pre-app meetings, that they will kind of listen to the meetings or listen to the ideas and then go forth and try to help the applicants better their project so they'll get funded. It's not a system where we just listen to you and then take it as it comes in. We try to help you and assist you so they ensure that you get funded as much as possible and be as competitive applicant. So I know Tanya can maybe speak more on that too if she would like to. But if there's any more questions, that was kind of all that I had as a brief overview of our sea grant process. Like I said, the only complaint that we're really receiving right now is the amount of money that we're giving and the cash match. So that's something that we're considering changing internally right now. We'll have to go back up through our RD and our board rule change aspect of it.
Any questions?
No, yeah, sure. I don't know if I just missed this, but where does the funding come from? Is it federal?
No, it is state funded. So that we have a general budget for our regional water planning councils for all 10, and for the regional one, the metro is a little separate. But we have basically it's a $1.4 million budget that I manage. And that $300,000 that comes from the sea grants is coming from that budget. That also includes our contractor support, our staffing budget. So that's part of all of that going in together that we do. Yeah, and it's part of that was one of the rules that we changed through our DNR board that passed that we were able to give that money from our budget, from the planning the whole council support budget.
Clete, what are some examples of other projects that the Sea Grant program is funded?
Sure. So we have I guess it all depends on the needs of what each council is what their interests are going. So the Coosa, North Georgia, one of their interesting projects that they're doing around Lake Lanier is that they're doing a nutrient trading project. So they were taking wastewater from different regions that may have had an excess of nutrients and then giving it to other wastewater treatment plants that weren't meeting all the top of their requirements. So there's been a big water quality issue going in with the nitrogen loads. So they're monitoring that and kind of going in and out trading the wastewater loads back and forth across the Lake Lanier Basin there. Another one that we had recently was in the Altamaha region, and they did some water quantity with well monitoring and with the ag permits. So kind of with the drought situation that we may have having down in southeast Georgia, they were kind of monitoring that and trying to see what applications, some of the research project that they were doing of how they could make the groundwater kind of expand for their ag. We've had another one last year about some stormwater implications, trying to do some education and to implement better stormwater sewer systems into the county, into the lower Flint region in southwest Georgia. Trying to think of some other ones that we've had. There's another one going on about climate change, about how rain is coming in, if it's going in harder, like shorter, faster mounts They're doing a research project there on that one. I'd have to go back and look at some more, to be honest. Those are some more of the interesting ones that I've been kind of overseeing with that aspect, though, along with Tanya's too, that she's been doing.
Other council questions?
Okay, any online?
I had a
Oh,
quick question.
sure. Great.
And forgive me if I missed this, but I know that they go through the regional councils for, I guess, endorsement.
Mhm.
More than one per region possibly in some years, or?
I'm sorry, what was that?
He asked if there were occasions where councils received awards, multiple awards for one fiscal year.
Yes, so they can, we can have multiple, there could be 2 or 3 people that could get, from each council region, if that's who applies. I was trying to, I know that has actually happened before, I believe, in the Savannah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was.
One year, I think we got them all, I want to say.
Oh, okay.
But- Okay.
I'm
go.
sorry. No, go ahead, Ashley.
I was gonna say, just piggybacking on what Clete said, and it was heavily due to those pre-application meetings and the involvement with the council early on. It was, not just a last minute thing, but there was endorsement early on, and then that pre-application process, like Clete says, it's not just a meeting where you come in and check the box. It's real feedback on how you can better prepare your application so that it's ready to compete for the fund.
Right. Yeah, but we do have to have the approval from the council, and particularly the council chair. They have to get their, check mark to go through. This is something that they're agreeing with this in their plan. And I'm not going outside of that. But it also helps, they'll go into they get extra points in our scoring system if they get multiple letters from a support from multiple councils too. This plan may, help additional councils.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, Clete, we really appreciate you taking time with us today. Thought it was timely as we wrap up our planning process. And it's been something that we've discussed here. So appreciate you shedding some light on what Georgia's doing.
Absolutely. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. My computer just completely shut down on a refresher update. I was trying to stop it in the middle of that.
No problem. No problem. Understood.
All right. Do I have any more questions? Please feel free to email me and reach out.
Tony, want to say something? Or?
Well, Ryan?
Okay, well, excuse me, we'll move on. We're gonna do a short break.
Can you guys,
Oh, we can hear you
can you
now.
guys hear me? I'm curious if you can hear, I'm just curious because I was just curious if because it's state funds, this could probably be used regularly with match for federal funds.
Is that a question, or are you making a?
It was a question really, because if they're like, I guess I didn't realize that the seed was just funded within the general budget, but there's like, if the South Carolina is actually funding this fund, then that will give also local governments the ability to use that as match for federal funds, because you can't tap into federal funds for match, but most of the time match is required.
Yeah, it seems like it. So that's a good point. That may be a way to leverage more funds. Yep. Okay. So again, the whole point of hearing about the Georgia Seed Grant Program, and that program I introduced you to last month, which is the North Carolina Ag Rat Program, is think about those programs and whether you want to make policy recommendations when we start talking about policy recommendations, probably at the end of this meeting, related to funding and funding of implementation activities that we identify in the next month or two for your plan. So that's the really important part. And that's where the rubber meets the road. You come up with great recommendations and we can put them in an implementation plan, but nothing's going to happen if there's not funding to get it done. And Georgia's Sea Grant program, even though it might seem small, is a way to keep those activities moving and to fund that stuff. So I'd encourage you to think about, do you think, that is that useful for South Carolina to have a similar program or something completely different? I don't know, but
The question is, Georgia apparently, I just looked it up, has a governor's office of planning and budget, has a grant program office that administer many kinds of grants, apparently, and this is one of them. Here's what I'm gathering. This South Carolina has such a thing.
I would expect there's grant programs in South Carolina or other activities. I can't speak to it. I don't know if you guys
To know how they would be asked for a new state entity to, I'm just, I don't know who we would ask.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's federal grants. He's asking more on state level. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question.
We recommend who we recommend.
Yeah, our funding provides a funding, the state funding that we have. So I don't know how that relates to the grant program, but that's certainly something you can try to find an answer to.
If we're going to consider that as an option for recommendation, we might want to know who to ask or how it might, at least the next step.
Right. Okay. It's 10:46. We'll do a short 10-minute break and we'll start up again about 4 or 5 minutes before the hour. 10:56. We're going to focus pretty much the rest of the meeting on development of technical recommendations. Before we talk about technical recommendations, I thought it'd be a good time to review what you all identified as your vision statement, and more importantly, what you identified as your goals. In the past, and in the other river basin plans, we've always tried to tie the goals that you developed in the first 2 or 3 meetings to your implementation plan. So where possible, we're trying to identify, here's the actions and strategies that you identified that help you achieve those goals from the beginning of your process. And because of that, I want to kind of remind everybody what some of those were. And one of them in particular, or a theme amongst your objectives and goals, is very timely given the impacts that we've just seen from Hurricane Helene. So I'll talk about it in just a second, but your vision statement. Anybody remember the vision statement?
It's in your heart, right?
It should be in your heart. I mean, should have heard 24 people just got it out. A resilient Upper Savannah River Basin plan that collaboratively, sustainably, and equitably manages and balances human and ecological needs. You picked resilient. That's the second word in that vision statement. I think that's appropriate given what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, not only with power, but the availability of power to help deliver water. So think about that. Resiliency. Usually we're thinking about resiliency in this setting for drought, right? But we just saw an instance where, having backup power and interconnections and the ability to quickly bring water back to your customers, if you're a water utility, is important. Or if you're, an agriculture user, you don't really need more water at that point. You got plenty. There's other things you're worried about, but resiliency is something I want you to keep in mind. You also mentioned resiliency in your goals. You said ensure water resources are maintained to support current and future human ecosystem needs, improve the resiliency of the water resources, help minimize disruptions within the basin. Just had a disruption, still have a disruption. So think about that when you're developing technical recommendations, and even maybe policy recommendations. Promote balance between development, industry, and economic growth in areas of adequate water resources. Advocate for responsible land use practices and identify funding sources. We talked about funding sources. We're going to talk about, one of the groups is going to talk about land use and development. So again, remember what your goals are that you identified early on. And then you also had one that we've already talked about, education, communication, engagement, that type of thing. And then you had one about collaboration. We've already talked about that as part of the planning process recommendations. Okay, just a reminder of how we're approaching these recommendations. We're trying to find consensus as quickly as we can. So when we do, we put them in a green bucket. If there's support, but not full support, we may revisit it at next meeting and try to wrap it up and decide, can we move it to the green bucket? Is there language adjustments we can make, so there's consensus, and if we can't reach consensus, we'll just move on. Technical and program recommendations, just a reminder what these recommendations can entail per the planning framework. Filling data gaps, improving models, getting additional models to address specific issues that we identified, improving data like population data or water demand data or land use data. Technical studies, we just heard about the Sea Grant program, which sounds like it funds technical studies that were identified in the regional water plans for Georgia. Technical training, in-stream flow requirements, those are just some of the examples identified in the planning framework. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. She's going to explain the group exercise.
Yeah, we have an activity today. So the last couple of meetings, we spent some time as a group developing ideas. You know, we went through and developed a big list of ideas for our technical recommendations. So now today, what we want to do so we can begin to finalize and whittle these down to what's really, really important to the council is we're going to allow you to self-select, and everyone should have this sheet here. And we have broken them up based on the list that we developed. We broke them up into groups. Some overlap a little bit, but we want you to take a moment to self-select your interest, right? We think that if you have an interest in one of these groups, then you can spend some time with others to kind of help flush this out and spend some time to really develop some recommendations that we can come back together on. You know, we'll have to move around because we do want you to look and see what you're interested in. So we'll have group 1, group 2, group 3, and then we have 4 that we can be online with. And I think we have Kirk on the line and Alex on the line. Maybe they can help facilitate that last group. So the first group, again, let's come over here. This is if you're interested, right? If you have an interest in talking more about the recommendations for land use and sedimentation, let's come to this corner. And the center we can keep for the water quality and data gaps. And then over here on this side, we'll go with growth and development. And I guess group 4 will get everything else.
Yeah, I think group 4, you online folks, you can tackle the ideas identified in the everything else section of that handout. Or you can, you know, choose to tackle some of the land use and sedimentation or water quality or growth and development. It's kind of a potpourri, whatever you feel you'd like to discuss.
So you guys,
that's your online group.
No.
No, you might as well, sure.
Okay.
Listen in. Yeah, let me just pause. And do the online folks have any questions about what you're asked to do? At the end of this exercise, this isn't just for the online folks, this is for everybody. At the end of this exercise, in about 45 minutes, we want you to have identified specific recommendations to propose to the rest of the RBC.
Yeah.
So it can't just be more ideas. It needs to be, here's a recommendation that we think would be useful.
And so don't be overwhelmed by the list of ideas, right? We're not expecting that.
All right, group 3, they're ready. They had moved on a long time ago. What we thought is that we would try to hear what the online group 4, came up with, and then we'll break for lunch, come back, kind of do a working lunch, and then go through group 1, 2, and 3. That work for everyone?
Sure. They're still in the room for 20 seconds. They have to.
Okay.
It'll close, pick them out.
Okay. Let me get back here in 20 seconds. We'll see what they came up with. They came up with like 20 recommendations, then we might just break for lunch. But,
They were shy.
where are they?
You can see the lights.
What? Oh, Tanya, good.
All right, everybody's back.
Okay, online group, we wanted to give you all the opportunity with your potpourri category, everything else categories, to offer up any recommendations in this technical recommendation category before we break for lunch. So do you all have a spokesperson that you identified, or do you have multiple spokespeople?
We do, John. Yeah, Alex has agreed to, he took some good notes during our session online and has agreed to share those. We have a collection of ideas and also a collection of 3 actual recommendations. We wanted to keep the ideas on tap for discussion of implementation later on, but 3 really solid ideas for technical recommendations. So I'll let Alex read those out.
Thanks, Kirk. So our headline quote is, "Your rain gauge is not as good as my rain gauge." And that was kind of a summary of some of the themes we talked about. I'm just going to go through them in order. We should extend a recommendation to extend flood mapping in South Carolina beyond the 100-year floodplain to include, for example, 200, 500, or 1,000-year floodplains with the most current, recent, and up-to-date technology and data reflecting current land use patterns and recent weather patterns. Next recommendation was on data usage and acquisition.
Can we talk about that first recommendation, then we'll go to the next one?
Seems reasonable.
Okay, so it's interesting, you all have a recommendation on flooding. I guess it's timely. That's typically something that's more part of the risk and resilience plan. And I guess my question is, does anybody know if that recommendation is already reflected in the South Carolina Resilience and Risk Plan, whatever it's called?
Whether or not the state resilience and risk plan has the recommendation to extend the flood mapping to the 1,000-year.
Nope. And y'all don't know, do you, Alex? Nobody in your group knew?
I'm sorry, one more time. I got a little distracted.
I was wondering if in your discussion of that recommendation to extend the flood maps, if anybody in your group already knew that that was a recommendation, part of the South Carolina Risk and Resilience and Risk Reduction Plan, or a similar recommendation. Do you have any idea?
I mean, wonderful. No one mentioned that in our discussion.
Okay, just curious. Okay.
John, I'm wondering if it would make sense for Alex to post the 3 recommendations in the chat so that you could copy and paste them right into a slide and we can see all the wording.
Yeah, that would be useful. He's got them already written.
Yeah. Give me a few seconds to paste that in.
Yeah. And while he's doing that, I guess kind of give us an overview of why you identified that recommendation to extend the flood mapping. Who felt that was important, and why do you think that's a important technical recommendation for this water plan? Who came up with the recommendation from your group? Who was pushing it?
I think he's copying and pasting.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was copy and pasting that. I mean, it was pretty much consensus. Multiple people pitched in to clarify that idea.
Okay.
You know, I think it's kind of focusing on both more detail and extending the floodplain to see, you know, what based on historic estimates might be less likely areas, but that could flood. So more detail, but also reflecting the current land use patterns and recent weather patterns versus an over-reliance on historical patterns, which may have changed.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the critical crux of this discussion. It was everybody acknowledged that things are changing and a reliance on really current data and tools to reflect land use, to reflect rain patterns that have been observed was a critical piece of this one.
All right. What does the rest of the RBC feel about that one, the first one, extend flood mapping to include the 200, 500, 1,000-year, most recent current update technology and data, reflect land use patterns?
Agree. Maybe it'll push people out of that.
Stormwater manager.
I would suggest that we do 100, if we're going to go that route, that we also advocate for the 100-year to be up everywhere. So there are many places where the 100-year is not identified.
Okay.
So
Any other thoughts?
does that capture that?
I say extend flood mapping in South Carolina To include the 100-year in all areas.
In what
And then
areas?
how do you capture this expansion?
And then,
Because they
And
don't,
expand,
And expand them.
by adding the 200, 500, and 1,000 year floodplain. Now, do you think is that a big ask?
That's a,
If you think it's a realistic recommendation, I mean, it'd be nice, but if you think that that's a recommendation that would ever be met. And I mean, I'm not suggesting you don't include it because it's
yeah.
unrealistic, but it's,
Is that just LiDAR work or something? Is that all it is?
Well, the new Office of Resilience, I think is close to having, and I don't remember the storms, but they're close to having something that's publicly available that shows different inundation areas for different storms. I don't know that it was anything going up to 500 or 1,000. It may be more 25-year, 50, 100. So I think we're close to having that being a possibility.
okay. Anybody opposed to that recommendation? What if we highlight it as a yellow bucket and then before the next meeting, do you mind checking to see what the resilience office has done and come up with, and then we could tweak it if needed? If there's redundancy or they've already done some of that. Does that work for everyone? Okay. All right, thanks, Alex. That's number one. Let's talk about your second one.
Yeah, you want me to read it, or, I mean,
Um,
so data usage and acquisition, utilizing the data obtained from established and credible systems in alignment with the RBC goals across the state before creating new systems, databases, or monitoring stations. When new data is developed, it needs to be publicly accessible and in a consistent, standardized format that supports public comprehension.
Guys put some thought into that one.
Well,
Nice. Any questions or comments from SDRBC? Can you give us one example of type of data or some form of data that you think applies?
Absolutely. So I believe Tanya Bonitatabas had the most experience of compiling information in Georgia from these different data sources. And so, it is a lift to get different organizations' data into the same format so they can be reviewed, by stakeholders in a single accessible portal. And then it also came into play with, based on, the stakeholders, that the state climatology office the CoCoRaHS network, I should say, doesn't use the same rain gauges as Clemson University or Clemson Extension recommends necessarily. And so there's two sets of rain gauge networks, at least from between those two organizations. And I'm sure there are more. And so we just I think the committee was just talking about getting all the data together, standardized, and including citizen science. So I don't know if that helps clarify.
No, that does.
can I recommend a little wordsmithing?
Sure.
I think he used the word. I'd like to see if they wouldn't mind changing the word utilize to compile the data. And then right before across the state for utilization across the state.
Here.
Yeah, with RBC goals for utilization across the state. Right before, okay.
Before across.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think that works. So one of the central themes we talked about was the mapping of existing credible data to the specific RBC goals, and not just collecting data for data's sake, but looking at how existing data can support the RBC goals. So I think that modification fits in with that. That works.
Any other questions or thoughts from the RBC in the room? Do you all think it's a good goal? Support it? Anyone opposed? Tanya, you okay with the slight tweaks that we made to the wording?
Well, she had to sign.
She had to sign off? Okay. Take that as I hope so. All right. What about number 3? Alex?
Update future models to consider anthropogenic uncertainties such as climate change, population growth, development scenarios, etc.
When you say update future models, are you saying models that look into the future or models that we haven't developed yet?
I suppose both. Maybe we don't need to put the word future in there.
Maybe it's to include future uncertainties. So any model should include future uncertainties. Maybe that's where the word belongs.
So update models to consider future anthropogenic uncertainties, climate change, population growth, development scenarios. So anthropogenic means caused by man, right? Are we?
We believe so.
We need that word.
I don't know if South Carolina's gonna adopt that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that word is necessary. Can we remove that? You okay with remove that group 4? Yeah.
I think it was included as a subcategory of some of these microclimates caused by highway widening, development patterns, and so forth. But I don't think it loses its accuracy or credibility reflecting the group's discussion if we took that word out.
So is this addressing concerns that the model that we currently use, right? Because the model you use, from my notes, does not address any of those land use changes or anything like that. So this recommendation would actually be recommending to use different models. Is that right?
It could be different models, or it could be using, for example, SWAM to look at future uncertainties. And there's ways to do that. We can adjust, well, easiest way is to adjust demands within a range. But on the supply side, we haven't done any of this yet. And it was envisioned to be potentially part of the next phase of planning, is to look at potential climate change impacts. So, what if you got more rain or less rain, or different intensity and frequency of rain events, and how does that impact the hydrology? We can incorporate that into SWAM by adjusting inputs. So that's one example. But it might be using a different model, like to address land use changes. It might be using a rainfall runoff model to figure out, all right, our flow is really changing. So we were talking about that back in that group there too. Even the idea of, in the SWAM model, we've been using historical data that goes back to, early 1900s. Sometimes you do hydrologic modeling where you say that data is not really representative of what's happening now. Let's only use 1960 and beyond, because prior to 1960, development was so different. Land use patterns were so different, and even the climate was so different that it doesn't behoove us to use that 40 years early in the last century. Part of our planning effort. We want more recent data. So it's things like that we might consider. Okay. What do y'all feel about that 4th one? Everybody okay with it? Anybody disagree with it?
I agree, but I'm wondering if I'm just thinking of the political climate in South Carolina. Is climate change going to be something that is going to raise concern on adoption of something like this?
I don't know.
Words.
Yeah.
Buzzwords.
That's actually kind of exactly that came up in the discussion, I think. And so, whether we want to, debate about anthropogenic climate change we can put that aside, because we can see weather changes and population growth and development of the landscape. And so those were kind of points that there was more agreement on than bringing in climate change. So I don't know if I captured that part, but if any of the stakeholders in our group want to speak up, now would be the time. Those were the 3 goals. So thank you. I will send notes on our discussion to the planning group.
Yeah, one way to tone that a little differently, John, is just to say climate.
Right. Or here's an example in Missouri, when we helped them with their state water plan about 4 years ago, climate change wasn't really a politically accepted word. So we replaced it with hydrologic variability, and they were okay. So, I mean, all we did was just change the name of the
Yeah.
word.
Well, and
The
that's
context,
what-
the discussion was the same, and they were fine with it. So,
That's what I'm
Yeah.
kind of getting at. Like, do we need to wordsmith it in a way that
When-
is
when we
broadly
fill it out.
accepted? Changing weather patterns is great.
right.
Mac wanted to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Mac.
Well, the only thing is I was saying is that's the thing. It's not always climate change. Everybody wants to holler climate change, but there are things we're doing from moving people around and building roads that are affecting it. And it's not all about all encompassing climate change. You need to look at everything.
Yep, good point. Yep. A lot of uncertainties.
We
So,
Folks
so
online.
that being the case, it should be at emissions because that's another issue that causes the, weather to do what it do, and that's really us doing it, not necessarily the weather. But I'm just asking.
Yeah,
If
Tanya,
not,
we asked, include emissions because it influences climate.
right?
And
That's
yeah,
what I'm asking.
I don't know, what does the RBC think?
I think that's
The
it,
causes
changing
of it.
weather patterns.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the causes, but just broadly
Right.
changing weather patterns.
Okay, so pointing out the cause isn't really necessary to get to the point of the recommendation. It's just that there are changing weather patterns regardless of the cause. And this one is focused on updating models to consider those changing.
And I think that could also be under development scenarios based on, plants that are built or amount of cars on the road, things like that all relates back to population growth and development scenarios and standards.
Okay. Okay. When we write these recommendations up, at least in the other plans, sometimes we've added additional discussion, which is reflecting the discussion that we've had here. So we'll try to remember that discussion and we'll go back to the reporting if need be, but oftentimes we bold the recommendation and then we include some discussion about why you made it and what you were thinking. When you review chapter 9, which includes all these recommendations, that's what we'll want you to read and make sure that we've reflected that discussion accurately, in addition to the bold recommendation that we've agreed on today. I say that because this discussion we're having is important because it helps us basically develop chapter 9. All right, so was it just those three, Alex? Those are good. Any other ones y'all talked about or you want to offer up?
I think Alex may have stepped away for just a minute. We had a number of other ideas that could lead to the implementation of these. And I think we agreed to keep those as notes for when we get into the implementation.
Okay. I'm going to put them in the chat, and when we break for lunch, we'll just copy them into a slide and we may take a quick look at them later on, especially if we come across some similar recommendations.
Yeah, Alex, are you there or did you step away?
Yeah, I'm here.
There he is. Yeah, maybe if we could put that whole document in the chat or send it to John.
Yeah, you can send it email to me and we can paste it in.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll do that.
All right.
So was there consensus on this third one? Do we feel good or we want to revisit it?
I think they feel good.
Felt
Yeah, I
good?
think
Okay.
it's a green bucket. Right? Yeah. Okay.
Looks
John,
better than I wrote.
I wanted to thank the group online for staying focused on technical issues. We talked about how difficult it is to talk about technical issues without spilling over into policy and politics and everything else. And the group really maintained a really good focus on technical needs, and just wanted to commend them for that.
Let me ask you one question about one that we had highlighted before, because it's been discussed at multiple meetings, especially beginning when Hope Mazel talked about climate, which was fund and establish a mesoscale network of weather and climate monitoring stations. That was a recommendation the Broad has made. That was one that we briefly talked about. We put it in the yellow bucket. Did y'all talk about that one at all?
Is that your rain gauge isn't as good as my rain gauge? Isn't that where they started this conversation?
Kind of, sort of, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, we talked about that in sort of some generalities, and I think the group recognized the need for a much broader but more importantly, more consistent network of rain gauge data, of stream gauge data, and things like that. So it's related to this one for sure.
Okay, so I bring it up because the climate office, said that's kind of been important to them, and I think they've tried to get funding for it and haven't succeeded so far. But I just want to make sure the RBCs consider it, and if they agree with it, then it goes as a recommendation. If they don't agree with it, that's fine too. But that's why I was pointing that one out specifically. Do you all want that as a standalone recommendation? Or do you think the general recommendation that we have, the first one we talked about, which is, go back to it really quick, is enough? Or not the first one, the second one, I mean. And that really is about the existing systems. Yeah, it's not the new ones. Yeah, so that doesn't really cover it.
I think it needs to be specific.
Yeah, if you agree with it, it needs to be a specific one, but I haven't really heard if y'all agree with it and you think it's useful or not. You remember what it was? Basically one really nice sampling station in every county generally that collects everything in a standardized way. It helps the climate office with their work rather
Does
than
it
having.
fall under the data gaps one?
Yeah, it's.
Or does everything else?
It kind of falls under data gaps too, but we threw it under everything else. There's some overlap between a lot of these.
And are we supposed to be looking, their group did everything else and they came up with new recommendations than what was here? Are we supposed to be looking at the existing ones also right here and now and doing yay or nay?
I think when we get through all four of our groups, we're going to go back through here and make sure we didn't miss anything that's important to anyone. So we didn't leave anything off that didn't get discussed. Yeah. And maybe that's where we talk about this one, but I wanted to bring it up because we had highlighted it as a yellow bucket one at a previous meeting. So I figured let's just talk about it now. But so you give it a thumbs up. Agree, thumbs up. Anybody opposed to it? I mean, there's expense to it. I think Hope said remember how much it cost?
It was like 50,000 just for the instrumentation, and then you've got to hire staff to maintain it.
Yeah.
It's multiple millions of dollars.
Yeah. So
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if Hope says we need it. I've got great trust in Hope. I really do. I don't mean to, but I do. I mean, she does a really good job and she's really professional. And if this is something that the climatology office thinks is important for their functionality to better support what we're doing here, then I think it's important.
Again, I'm not pushing for it. I just remember everything she said. And one of them was that South Carolina is one of only a few states that doesn't have this type of system. And that's what kind of stuck in my mind. Like, oh, that's interesting. Everybody else thought it was important, but we don't have that in South Carolina. But maybe we don't need it because of a lot of other stations. I don't know. So everybody good with it? Move it to a green bucket, or you want to think on it another month?
Green.
Green, all right, it's green.
Would that be combined with the second point, data usage and acquisition? Or is that separate?
I think it's probably still going to be separate because that one, I think, focuses on existing data. I don't know, think about that a little.
Yeah,
bit.
there's a little bit of.
Development has to be accessible.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, group 4. Good job. We'll break for lunch, come back, and we'll start with group 1. Lunch is a little different this time. Sandwiches, there's a variety of them. There's a sheet of paper that has a color code. And you look at the top of the toothpick for whatever color it is, and that tells you what it is. There's other stuff as well. So help yourself, and what time is it? 12:15. 12:13. We'll try to do this in 17 minutes and start up at 12:30. For you online folks, want to read your line at 12:30. That's when we'll probably begin the discussion again.
John, will we be returning back to these?
Continue eating if you're still eating. So let's talk about group 1, it's land use and sedimentation related recommendations. Does group 1 have a spokesperson?
I've got a bunch of notes.
You're the spokesperson.
I don't think anybody else agrees. So by
Okay,
default.
so it falls to you.
Now we did it a little bit differently because we went to the sheet that was provided to us.
Yep.
And made comments on what was existing and or added around it.
Okay.
Um, All right.
So I'll start with what was on the comment sheet, then we'll tweak them as we go, I guess.
Okay. We changed a lot of the language in this yellow bucketed box. Because we felt it was incredibly soft.
And again, these were just ideas, by the way, that we talked about
Okay.
before, so we
So-
hadn't crafted them into recommendations, but that's
Okay.
what
We
hopefully you've
corrected them a
done.
little bit
Good.
further. We got rid of all this encouraging stuff. And made it a little bit more solid.
Okay.
See where we started.
Okay,
Oh, so the first bullet, of course, we want to minimize, but it didn't, it didn't indicate to how. So we entered a sentence saying through the implementation of infiltration, riparian buffers, land use planning, setbacks. So we kind of gave some guidance as to how to minimize the stream bank erosion rather than leaving it open-ended.
riparian buffers, land use.
Infiltration, riparian buffers, land use planning, setbacks. We were just kind of throwing things at it.
Yep. Yep. And then minimizing stream bank erosion, scour source sedimentation reservoirs. Is that kind of what you had?
Yeah, we put it at the end, but not here nor there. It's good. And then instead, so I think we skipped over the studies to better identify sources. Instead of encourage, we further incentivize the establishment of
Riparian buffer, stream bank restoration, other practices, reduce sediment oils, yeah.
and there was even noted, and possibly through the development, I don't know if this stands alone, but we talked about developing a toolbox and or resources for those incentivizations. I don't know if that's just kind of side talk. I don't know if that's.
Maybe that's part of implementation plan. We'll think of some strategies or actions to.
So rather than encourage, we developed and incentivized green infrastructure and stormwater ordinances.
Okay.
Not sure if this is the best way to put it. We've got we started the fact that encouraging developers wasn't enough, that there needed to be accountability and penalties imposed. So it's not just encouraging, we want to, if they're not adhering to stormwater ordinances, we want the big smackdown. Lack of a better, right?
I think you can remove that. Every ordinance has penalties and enforcement measures, so they shouldn't be able to do that. Even, if you wanted to say strengthen.
Strengthen the penalty for
Enforcement.
what?
Strengthen penalties for non-compliance with stormwater ordinances. That would be a little different.
We didn't necessarily delete that second bullet, we just didn't comment on it, correct?
Okay, so what does the RBC think about those around this general theme of reducing sediment loading to reservoirs? You like those ideas? Any concerns with them? You think they're important to include in our plan?
How do you measure this good?
How do you measure them?
How do you permit any meters in places, and what do you do to figure out if you're successful?
Yeah, one way, and we'll talk about this at the next meeting. If you recall at the last meeting, we mentioned that there's new bathymetric surveys done of the Army Corps lakes. Since then, we've talked to the Army Corps about those surveys, and they've actually used those recent surveys, compared them to when the lakes were originally built, and looked at changes in rates of sedimentation. And they've used that to project out to 2075, I think, sedimentation rates, so they know how much volume they're going to be losing. So they've established kind of a sedimentation rate, an average rate. That might be one way to do more bathymetric surveys to see if the strategies that you put forth to minimize sediment generation is causing that rate to lower. Just an example, I guess. You could also just do in-stream sampling, I guess, during storm events and see if you've got less turbidity compared to.
Live in Greenville, and the reading runs really, very full.
Yeah, okay.
They have a policy on as far as when they clear cut, what they do as far as restoration was concerned, the court.
I bet they probably do. Can't believe they could just go out.
I've been told that they don't do any kind of dredging unless they lose more than 10% of the reservoir's capacity.
Well, I think they've lost more than 10% in.
They have. And haven't ever seen too much dredging.
Yeah. It's expensive. Okay, well, if no one has any issues with number one, I'm tempted to make it a green bucket. Is everybody comfortable with that?
I just have, do we want to say like reducing sediment loading to reservoirs, through, and then make all of them kind of like the activity? So through studies, through further incentives, through, incentives.
Yeah.
They're stronger penalties.
Yeah, and we can adjust the wording when we put this in the chapter, but that's a good idea. So we'll make it so it reads like a full recommendation. Okay. What do you have next, Jill?
You left that next bullet as it stands.
Study impacts of changing land use on stream flow characteristics, magnitude of flows, timing of flows, flashiness. Everybody agree with that one? We had yellow bucketed that before, but we think that's important. His is another example of when we write the implementation plan to figure out how do we encourage and fund and execute those studies. We'll have to come up with a way and cost and who's responsible for doing it. Just keep that in mind. If you want to leave it as a recommendation, then it'll probably end up in our implementation plan in some form or another. And you also prioritize it. You'll look at all the other recommendations and say, this is something we want to do right away, or this is something that we don't need to do right away, but we think it needs to be done in the first 5 years or 10 years or something. Keep that in mind when we talk about all these recommendations. The green bucket for that one. Everybody's implied silence is just going to make these all green buckets. So we're going to have to speak up if you really disagree with something. The default is the green bucket. Silence and consent. Well, yeah, well. Yeah, not normally. Yeah, just keep that here. Study impact of land use changes on stream flow and identify and prioritize land for conservation. Was that one you talked about?
We did. I don't think we didn't make any changes to that one, but we added a bullet to follow.
That's kind of the same theme, or?
Yeah, develop and fund county conservation and mitigation banks for conservation easements and activities.
for conservation and easement activity.
Develop and fund county conservation and mitigation banks for conservation.
Just say for land conservation.
Just a programming note. All the person that come up on their hours.
Comes under yours too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, I'm okay with being both places, just.
Well, maybe we should address it now. Do you have something that's different?
Like me, had more to do with, it starts out with how you determine which land to conserve. So it's develop a strategy to identify priorities that properties that could impact quality and quantity of water. Then collaborate with South Carolina Conservation Bank and land trusts to conserve those properties.
Read the second part of it again to me.
Collaborate with South Carolina Conservation Bank and land trusts to conserve those properties.
Okay.
And then we
Do we
added
add-
passive, right? So we're not relying on the state conservation bank. We're looking for counties similar to Oconee County to develop their own with their own county funds that can leverage the state conservation bank as well.
Yeah. It was in our group because it was having to do with development, taking away from development and stuff.
I just don't want to use the development of the county banks. Because other than that, the bullets now are the same. I think, unless you disagree, I think developing the strategy to identify properties is similar to the study, the impact and prioritize.
Yeah.
The only difference is the fact that we're recommending a further development of county conservation funding mechanisms as well.
Okay. So can it be both? Can it be developing the county funding aggregations and also collaborate and work with the conservation?
I don't mind their wording, though. I kind of like it better than studying the impact of. I like their statement of methodology. Yeah, that one.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'll just say, develop a strategy to identify and prioritize.
Okay. So the Broad RBC had a very similar recommendation, and they have a meeting, an implementation meeting. They're in the implementation phase on November 21st. Their specific implementation plan called to address that recommendation, called for bringing in Michelle Eddy of RTI Inc., who developed this watershed model. That watershed model has been used to support the ecological flow relationship work. They've already built it for all of South Carolina. They use that watershed model and some other tools to do a very similar study in the Catawba Basin, both in North and South Carolina, to prioritize properties that could impact quantity and quality of water and identify those for conservation. So it's the same theme. They've just already done this type of study in the Catawba. So I mentioned that if you want to listen in on her presentation to the Broad RBC on November 21st, I can send you that information, or there'll be a recording of it too. So for what it's worth, that's discussed also in the Saluda RBC, and they may end up with a similar recommendation.
That's an option for as a tool.
As a tool, right? As a tool to help prioritize land conservation. It's been a common theme in a lot of the RBCs. Okay, well, as written, does it kind of incorporate everything you guys thought of, and are you comfortable with it, group one? Yeah, okay. Okay. What else did you have? This one on financial impacts of increased sedimentation. Did y'all?
We left those next to as they stand.
Okay, so, and I forgot to mention this before, and you probably realize this, but the first one was from the Broad. They developed and identified that as part of their plan. And the next one, the Saluda has identified that one, and adopted it as part of their plan. You guys said you left it as is, meaning you like them? You recommend we keep them?
We didn't change them just to keep it consistent.
Mhm.
One of the things I think that we briefly talked about, but I don't know if we went in depth enough about it, was on the last one. We're pretty much, our cities and counties are required every year to go through a comp plan process. And we're already required to look at resiliency as a component of this. This just enumerates specific resources that we recommend that they go to.
Okay.
So those plans are listed or guidelines, just. Yeah, we didn't have any issues with it, but we already required to do that.
But you said every year you go through?
Every 5 years.
5 years, okay.
I misspoke.
Okay.
Do you actually have to consult the South Carolina Office of Resilience?
You do not. So this is recommending resources, but that's not required unless you change the Planning Act or Comp Planning Act, which was most recently amended in 2020.
So I think this recommendation was add on to that comp plan process that I think.
Yeah, I think that when the Saluda discussed this, and I wasn't at the last meeting, Kirk, if he's still on, he may remember, but that was the point of specifically mentioning the resilience plan and hazard mitigation plans, is to make sure or to encourage that as part of the process, since it wasn't a requirement.
Yeah, that was my reading of it. It's an encouragement and listing of resources to refer to, not a requirement.
Right.
If you want to do more than encourage it, you got to change the comprehensive plan
Correct.
Yeah.
to require it.
Yeah. Do you want to go that far and suggest that the comprehensive plan act be changed?
I'm not speaking for the Office of Resiliency, but do they want to deal with 46 counties and how many municipalities?
220 something.
Probably not.
Yeah. On reviewing their comprehensive plans.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, John,
Yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
this is Kirk. Yeah, on that one, I think the theme was mostly local and the utilization extension of plans that affect locality. So that was the key word there. That's what we talked about quite a bit with the Saluda.
Okay. Okay, and everybody comfortable with both these recommendations? And online folks too, if there's still, how many online members do we still have? Three, okay. Please chime in if you're uncomfortable with any of the language or you disagree with the recommendation. I'm just looking across the room to get consensus and I see it, but I don't want to leave you all out. So speak up if need be. Okay, was that it for group one? Yeah. That was it, group one?
Oh, no, there's more. Sorry, there's more. We're busy. And we made it all the way to ranch too, and still got all this stuff. All right, so I don't know if we should group these together or not. They're ordinance related, so you can tell me whether or not we separate them. Advocate for the development of county ordinances such as riparian buffer and tree ordinances. What we're really getting at is the promotion of the riparian buffer ordinances. Such similar to, Pickens County came on board after Greenville County got theirs. So, and I haven't seen any tree ordinances clean up in our space. We talked about stormwater and land use and such and so forth. There aren't any local tree ordinances that we know about that talk about how you develop your land and leaving it maybe more in the natural state than what normally is done.
Buffers. Sorry. Okay. What's the rest of the REC feel about that one? Is Max still on or he has to leave?
Max on,
Mac?
Connie Winbush is on, and Alan Stewart's.
Yep.
Can we change county to also include cities, so local governments or local ordinances? Make less inclusive.
Okay, just say local, or should I say county and city?
I think
Local,
local's fine.
okay.
Yeah, words. Duplication of ordinance.
Yeah. Daniel, as an ag person, seeing that give you heartburn?
Yes and no. I see the greater good of it all, and so I'm willing to kind of give it a green bucket.
Yeah.
The amount of development we have going on in the county, it's gonna be needed.
Okay, so you're willing to live with it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Max got a comment too.
Yeah, Max, go ahead, Mac, if you have a comment.
Yeah, well, okay, when you're talking about those local county orders like that, are we talking about for like development or like residential and commercial properties? Or are you talking about all encompassing? Because then you start bringing in forest ag, then yeah, I do got some issues because what we've done in Abbeville or tried to do in Abbeville. So, define that, which level of zoning are you doing that on?
Yeah. Did y'all discuss
New
that?
development.
Yeah, it'd be on new development.
New development, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and the only reason I bring that up, I'll give you out the reason of my thinking. In Abbeville, at one point, they actually brought up a grass cutting ordinance for the county. And I had to go to the meeting and like, do y'all realize that we don't want to cut a hayfield when it's 12 inches tall? We need it to go a little taller sometimes. And it didn't go anywhere, but somebody had to go speak up. So yeah, as long as you're leaving forest ag and that kind of thing out of it, yeah, it's definitely needed in the new developments, as we all know by seeing what we see. So yeah, I appreciate yeah, that's right. Good.
Okay. All right. Everybody okay with that? Awesome. Well, these are easy. What else did you have, Jill?
Last one, I promise. And this one's a little lengthy, so I'll read slowly. Audit and update the state stormwater standards to reflect new storm scenarios and data. Okay, you do have to wordsmith this a little bit. Such that it should develop regional versus statewide standards.
You're encouraging development of regional versus statewide standards.
Yeah, that the statewide standards didn't apply the way they currently are, that they need to look at different areas of the state differently and have the stormwater scenarios reflect geological and other.
Can we say like and consider regional differences or something, or?
Can it help you with this one, John?
Is that?
And as part of that, it was mandate analysis at receiving water body rather than site discharge. And I don't think I quite got that right. John's gonna help me.
New development would analyze in the receiving water body. So, yeah, I need to think about actually where,
New development's impact on receiving.
mandate new development's impact in receiving water bodies on the watershed scale. And what that's getting at is not just looking at a project boundary analysis, but further down into the watershed and how those new developments impact the watershed. That's not mandated currently.
Okay.
You need the word impact after the development.
Whoop. Thank you, Katie. What do others think about that one? Daniel shaking his head, yes. Anybody have problems with it?
And a substantial cost to engineering stormwater protection plan.
Does it add substantial cost to this plan?
I'm assuming it would add the plant.
It would probably add a cost to the engineering design phase, because they would essentially have to model the site in different ways to come up with something that works at the boundary and also in the watershed. And so the analysis would probably be more expensive. The implementation, the actual construction probably wouldn't change that. You're just going from building a pond this way to building it that way. But yeah, but there'd be a cost for new development.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Still comfortable with it, or? Not super excited about it. but you
I
could
know
live
how
with it.
much developers fuss about paying for the current stormwater protection plans.
Yeah.
So.
Also doing business, baby.
But we can, do you want to ponder that one for a month and we can revisit it next month, or you good with it?
If the body is good with it, I'll go along.
Okay. You guys are kind of an easy group.
I'd almost say a yellow bucket right now myself, just to further wordsmith it.
Okay. We'll put it on the list to revisit next month.
Might be worth a check with DES, see how they would analyze that. They've got, hopefully they have to approve those plans.
Jill, what else did you have? Is that it? All right. Excuse me. Okay, we're still talking about land use and sedimentation. Did group 2 or 3 have any further thoughts about recommendations related to land use or sedimentation? And I know your development group may have some that kind of touch on it, but we'll wait, talk about those later. Nothing from group 2 or 3. Okay. All right. Ready to move on to water quality and data gaps? Okay. Group 2, who's your primary spokesperson?
Jim, don't take the.
John Haynes?
Okay. So we simplified this word salad by eliminating a big chunk of it. So if you go down to the 9th line that starts with need for more data. Keep going. All right. Okay. So keep going down.
Is it on this page?
Is that
or
at the very bottom?
Next page.
Yeah.
They might not be in the same order.
Go back up one page. Okay, so need for more data and delete that.
Go down the study.
And the following 5 or 6 lines.
We'll just duplicate.
All the way down through study impacts. That whole page could just go away.
Okay.
Because that was duplicated.
Okay.
I hope it was duplicated. Because it's duplicated on this page, but I don't see it duplicated up there.
Oh, I didn't, I'm sorry. Oh, no wonder you had so many on your.
Don't duplicate.
Yeah, I just double copied it when I put this together. Sorry about
Okay, so need to put all that back.
That's just.
That's control on the keyboard. Okay. strike that, ignore it.
That was my test to make sure you read it.
Well, it was a little bit confusing there, and we picked them out one at a time and realized it was a whole chunk
We've
of it.
already talked about this, yeah, okay.
Okay, so, I think we can take care of a couple of these pretty quickly. The line starting with SWAM model and need for additional models. And I think improved water use data. I think all those actually got consumed by group 4 and one of their.
Okay, yeah, they do have a recommendation that kind of touches on
So
that.
you can kind of put a note that goes down. Okay, the top one, I'm sorry, next to the top, incorporate recommendation from recent stream audit study to expand number of stream flow gauges where it makes sense. We had that marked as a green, pretty much as it is. But we had a little question in there about, do we really need more of those stream gauges? So
yeah,
but where it makes sense, kind
Right.
of qualifies it enough, I think, so go and stand like it is.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion about this last time, and Jill, you were involved, and Scott. I think you chimed in and provided, you said that, yeah, there's been an audit and kind of a study to figure out where we most needed stream gauges. Y'all remember that discussion?
I do. And there was like an area, there's some that had been included since the last conversation, but there was some that, there was an area that still needed a couple. Still think it's worth analyzing.
Well, we have put in a number of gauges, in the Savannah Basin. Over the past 5 years. Charles River, Clean Creek, Upland, Stevens Creek watershed. I think Longtail Creek we done recently, so we put a fair number. I think my comment about gaps was, I wouldn't mind having another gap between the two. But that was, that's not the council's.
What was that?
I was
Have another what, 1 or 2?
Mountain gauge.
Oh, mountain
Gauge.
gauge.
And so maybe we can do it where, the analysis needs to be done, whether or not there's enough, and if there is, then we're good, but if there's not, then it's, because I think it's a statewide conversation too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this has come up in all the RBCs. Do we have enough gauge information? Depends on the purpose, I guess.
Right.
What you want the data for. So.
You should like analyze the need. On my first bullet for the stream gauges.
Well, Scott, have you kind of routinely or every 5 years or 10 years analyzed the need for additional gauges, or is it just kind of as there's a study going on, you're looking to decide, oh, do we need more gauges to support this specific study?
Well,
Or both?
I think the drive to evaluate where new gauges need to go right now is driven by, we know funding is coming, and we need to get sites. That's how, the last time I did some workshops, listening to, I believe, maybe state and federal folks. We knew we had additional money coming, so we're trying to figure out what sites to prioritize, and we did that. And I still have a list of sites collected over the years that people are interested in monitoring. But as a new flood happens or conditions change somewhere, then new sites, identify new sites, monitor. So it's kind of a flux a lot.
Yeah.
So I imagine at some point we'll want to return to the remaining recommendations that haven't been fulfilled yet and evaluate those and collect information about what other sites have been identified. So I think Joe said the premise to be on that analysis.
So it should be something like review recommendations from stream audit studies and consider new locations, based on changing conditions.
I don't know if I've asked this question or talked about, but are there any specific sites that this council has thought of yet or mentioned?
I don't think we identified any that we needed to support the work we were doing, basically water quantity analysis. I don't think we said, yeah, it would be great to have a gauge on this stream because we don't know what's going on here.
I've got to go back in my notes. I thought Tanya had one location mentioned very early on. But I don't have my handy dandy iPad. I think there was one.
Yeah, she might have. I'll put a note. Maybe we just leave this as yellow.
It's the same reviewing recommendations, and that's historical, but as Scott was stating, as new occurrences happen, or so I wouldn't want to limit it to reviewing historical recommendations with making the statement that future studies could I'd also identify future needs. I don't know if that reads that way or not.
I guess I was trying to make that point by saying and consider new locations. So it's both, where did we look, where did we identify before that we needed them? Are those still necessary, or has that need gone away? And then have things changed? Like maybe there's a batch of new withdrawals on some stream where there was no gauge, and now it'd be great to have a gauge there. Just as an example. Okay, let's revisit this one next month. Okay, John, what else did you have?
Okay, so skip down now to recommendations for technical studies. We looked at that, and the terms that came to mind were vague and ambiguous.
Yeah, this was just a kind of a all-encompassing thing that wasn't meant to be a recommendation. It was meant to think about, do we need technical studies? And what would those be? Did you identify any?
Maybe we need to just create a potential list of what those would be.
If there are any, maybe there aren't any, but yeah.
Okay. So we left that yellow.
Okay. I guess that'll be part of your homework, not yours, but everybody's homework is, are there any data gaps and studies needed? Or excuse me, I'll just say any studies needed. Okay. What else?
Okay, so and then let's see. Improves in-stream flow requirement information. That kind of got consumed into the potential studies. So
Just put a question mark there.
yeah,
I don't remember why that one was specifically identified. But
yeah,
it was
and
there.
that could have been in the need for more data for that matter.
Right.
Impacts of drought on fish kills due to low oxygen. There's 3 different issues that have different impacts individually. It's a very poorly defined issue in itself. We left that yellow for more homework.
What are the 3 things that you've
The
said?
drought is one, the fish kill is one, and the oxygen is one.
Oh, okay. Okay, this was one I think Tanya specifically mentioned, right?
I think that was my memory of it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and she's not on anymore, right? So we might need to revisit why Tanya thought this was
I think she had a specific problem in mind, but it wasn't clear what that was. The fish kills can be due to a lot of other things besides oxygen as a result of a drought. And oxygen can do a heck of a lot other things other than kill fish in the process, the stream chemistry, redox reactions, all that stuff. It's just not very well defined.
Okay. Okay, we'll try to prod Tanya to get some more information on that, consider
Yeah.
the next one. Okay, what about the second?
Okay, and discuss, identify potential pollutants, because of the next phase of planning, we said that one's good. I think we had a green one, made out green.
Okay.
Tanya just joined back.
Oh, hey Tanya, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's all right. We were talking about this one I'm highlighting on the screen, which is one that you brought up, study impacts of drought on fish kills due to low dissolved oxygen. Can you expand on that and why you thought that would be, or why that's needed as a recommendation?
I think in general, what I was trying to get across was the need to grow out the available data throughout the system so that people are aware of what's happening. But I apologize. I don't know when that was brought up. I'm sure it was
It was a couple months ago. That wasn't the last meeting.
I mean, I can think of, yeah, I mean, but I think at the root of it is the lack of publicly available data for knowledge of what's actually happening throughout the system.
Okay, so you think it's kind of already addressed by the recommendation that your group came up with?
I think so, yes.
Okay. I'm gonna remove it if that's okay. We're good with that. Yep, okay. All right, thank you, Tanya. Okay, and John, for this first one, you were saying that your group kind of agreed with it.
Yeah, we like it. That one's okay.
Yeah. Katie, I think you had suggested this one, right? And you specifically mentioned bacteria, nutrient, sediment.
Those would be the three, the
Mhm.
big three.
And is the rest of the RBC comfortable with? Well, let's see. Discuss and identify potential pollutants of concern to explore in the next phase of planning. I guess it.
Kind of kicking the can down the road.
Right. Are you basically trying to say that in the next phase of planning, we want to explore these potential pollutants and solutions to?
I'd say the pollutants are already identified.
Right. So is it, I mean, do you feel like there's a good understanding of where there's issues? And in the next phase of planning, you want to identify solutions to reduce these pollutants? Yes. Yeah, okay.
All of these representatives change the scope of the whole of the sea. In expansion of scope into other things besides just water quality.
If it's related to water quality, yes, that's an expansion of scope that was planned for the first phase, but once the plan is developed, then it was kind of always out on the table. If the RBC decided they wanted to tackle specific quality related issues, they could.
Right, so the last one down there is going to say change the scope. Basically.
Yeah, you're right.
And so when it does that, then all this other stuff kind of falls in under it. It's potential.
Yes, so you're right. The broad came up with a pretty general one that says, yeah, we want to study some of these things, but they kept it open-ended. Would you be comfortable, Katie, if if this recommendation was in our plan, not having this one, or do you want to expand this one by specifically mentioning bacteria, nutrients, and sediment? Or?
I would just say including bacteria, nutrient loading. And then we'd be fine with it.
So we could then get rid of this one if we decide to keep this one. Does everybody like this one with the broad already developed?
Yeah, we had that one green.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm gonna move this green down here and then I'm just gonna strike this one out. That good?
All right, the next two are related to each other. And the third one, which starts with continue, that one also, all three of those really can be addressed by the last one.
Okay, so you think
So,
you
yeah,
don't really need those because the last one's general enough that it kind of leaves it
Right.
open to
right.
do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody okay with that? We get rid of these three and just keep the last one?
Can I advocate for the word publicly available to be built in?
I love that idea.
I'm looking to see where we can put it here, which is. Where would you like to put in publicly available if we adopted this last one? Would include evaluation of surface water quality and maintaining publicly and promoting publicly available data,
Yes,
something like that.
that's right.
Or
Let me ask a question about that particular phrase, publicly available data. It seems to limit, it could, in one sense, it could limit the availability to only what's out there publicly. Whereas I would like to see it all, everything that has something to do with water resources in the state made public.
Agreed with that point. I think that maybe when we get to number 4, maybe it kind of all ties back together. But I do think a statement that we would like to see, especially state-funded data, a push to make sure that it's publicly available for informed decision making.
Isn't it already?
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
Not really.
Not much.
Should all be.
It wasn't perfect.
But yeah, that it opened up a big box for us too about consistency of data, how you can go across databases, because
Those are details. We can.
those are the details, but it opened up a big box underneath it to get all that.
This is a statement in principle.
There you go.
Max that.
Well, and I agree with y'all wholeheartedly about the public data. But okay, is this going to be in state, or this is a government document, right?
Well, I mean, depends how you look at it. It's your river basin plan. It's being funded by government funds. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's in theory, it's if we were running this country like we were supposed to, it's all publicly available anyway, right?
Everything's spoiled.
That's not going to happen.
So what
Okay.
about adding easily accessible? Because it doesn't necessarily, like, the state doesn't have to house all the data, but people need to know how to use APIs and REST services so that the data can be accessible.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, yeah, it's public data, but finding it sometimes is an act of Congress. So yeah, I mean, so I agree with you. But yeah, okay. I just was questioning that. It is public data anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we can I love the idea of wordsmithing, and I'm stoked that everybody agrees.
Yeah, I was gonna
It
say,
needs to be
group 4
publicly
already kind of
accessible.
hit on, so does that need to be included in the other recommendation? So
I like-
kind of expanding the scope of the other recommendation.
Yeah.
Which recommendation are you talking about, Katie?
So this in group 4, the one that you have partially highlighted.
Yeah.
Kind of hits on what I think Tanya is saying.
Yes.
And by adding it to the recommendation from the other group, it kind of changes the scope of that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think the intent of this one was just to say, hey, here's what we want to focus on in the future planning efforts. It's not really speaking to type of data or whether it's publicly available or only partially publicly available or understandable by the public. I see the point, but adding that to this, I think, kind of changes the message and might confuse people. Whereas we've got the publicly accessible part here, or maybe there's more we can do to strengthen this one to make that point. But I think this one makes the point pretty well. But I don't know, Tanya, what do you think?
That one only
No.
applies.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's great. Wherever, if we can make a general statement, the data should be publicly available and accessible, I'm happy however that works out.
Okay, John just made the point behind me that this one just applies to new data, needs to be publicly accessible. Is there a concern about existing data that's not publicly available or
Yes, I
accessible?
thought that was their.
I would expand it to historic data as well.
Okay.
I do think putting it in there will mean that Myra, as she is considering right now, what their regulatory system looks like, putting more emphasis on making sure the GIS department is strong and can do the job of being able to work with communities is important because they're going to need funding to do that.
Okay. So I just changed this one to say historic data and new data when developed needs to be publicly accessible in a consistent standardized format. Is that good? Yep. Tanya, you're familiar probably with South Carolina's Watershed Atlas, right? Have you used that?
I am. So the Watershed Atlas has been stuck using HIPAA rules. So whereas it is extremely well laid out, the data is not actually there. You get to the end and it says, send us a FOIA. So there are ways that South Carolina is able to relook at the way the data is accessible from my understanding. That should change that, but the Atlas is a great jumping off point.
Okay. Okay. All right, John, what else? Is there anything else or?
I think our work is done.
Your work is done. All right. So group 2, we've got a couple we're going to revisit. What did we decide with this first one? Why don't I have anything next to it? I don't think we need that one, do we?
I think that captured in the second one, right?
Yeah, I think I forgot to cross that out. Oh, the wells. Yeah, I don't think there's been discussion on that. I don't think we need that. So, okay. Okay, group 3. What do you have?
Okay, so we agreed with the first one without really any changes. Already got to go on it. So
Yeah, I think we agreed on that before as a kind of a general.
So the second one, we changed the verbiage around on it. We went to ensure developers work with water utility. Used ensure twice. To ensure adequate water availability and infrastructure by working with county and municipalities to make this part of the permitting process. I know some of them already have it, so let's do it.
Make it part of the permitting process?
Yeah. Permitting process for the new developments and stuff. You get the building permits and stuff, they have to work with to make sure the water's there.
So you're suggesting that the water permitting law be amended and require that?
No, that we work with the counties to get counties, municipalities to make sure that their building permitting process includes ensuring that there's adequate water supply.
Okay.
And some areas there's not. I mean, some areas that's not part of the process. I know Griffin County it is.
You have infrastructure, we asked them.
Okay, so can we be specific then when we say in part of the permitting process so people don't confuse?
Part of the building.
Building?
Yeah.
Should include roads too.
Yeah.
Is adequate water availability, speaking of like infrastructure in the ground to get the water to the new development, or
And capacity.
and capacity?
Yeah. Yeah, that's both of them. I mean, we get requests all the time. Whether or not we have the capacity.
Trying to think of a way to not have insure twice here.
Yeah,
The probably
Guarantee you right there.
Guaranteed.
Well, yeah, is guarantee too strong of a word or? To guarantee adequate water availability? I guess I would question, how do you guarantee adequate water availability? I don't think you can. I don't think you can ensure adequate water availability either under all conditions. I mean, it all comes down to,
Well, it sort of means if you can't do it, you don't develop.
yeah.
Why don't we just,
Is there a monitoring?
why don't we just flip it around and say, work with counties and municipalities to make the building permitting. To start with that.
Required developers work with, does that work?
Yeah, when you do that.
I'll say, yeah.
It requires it there.
Or would you say amend the building permitting process to require developers to work with water utilities?
That would shorten it down.
It's American, and you can't get a building permit, or you can't get electrical or water service to your residents unless you have a building permit from the county. Modify, bring the water availability into that.
Amend the building permitting process in counties and municipalities?
Yeah. Just take that out of between requiring developers.
Okay, everybody like that? Forget about the wording. Does everybody like the concept?
Concept.
Like the concept? Yeah. Okay,
The next two,
let me make sure we can put this in a bucket.
okay,
Everybody's good,
yeah,
completely good with it, right? Okay. It's in a bucket. Okay, next two.
the next two were actually covered under previous groups.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
hit those on this land use.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so those are, go on.
and then we're okay with, I know that this came out of the Saluda Basin, because I was there at the last meeting with our well water, and we were just like, I mean, we're okay with keeping it in there, we just don't know how applicable it is for the upper Savannah.
That was something that Tanya really was pushed in this space, was whether or not we know how many.
Yeah. But it also
landowners-
came up on the Saluda Basin
Did it?
too when I was there.
Yeah, so did in the saluted, do they have the understanding that there is a significant? Like, it's still the understanding, okay. Because I think we were trying to figure out the numbers, like how many
Like how
people
much-
truly are
I mean,
not serviced.
That's what a little less at the library. Because I remember meeting discussion, we had a big discussion about that last month. Because I was building it. And I'm okay with it. I mean, we were okay with it. We just, I mean.
Yeah. It's not actually that difficult of a question to answer. I did a study 21 years ago in Wake County, North Carolina. They had the same question. So City of Raleigh and 12 municipalities, and then there's unincorporated areas of Wake County. And there's a lot of growth in the unincorporated areas. And there was a private water supplier that had about 200 different community water systems. And the question was, are all those community water systems that are on wells sustainable, and how much are they impacting surface water availability in the county as it grew, especially in unincorporated areas? So figure out that total water use in the groundwater and look at the impacts. We basically just collected water service areas from all the municipalities, overlaid them, figured out where there's gaps, and that's everybody that's on a community well or a private well, and then made some assumptions about per capita usage, totaled it up and did a water balance. And that water balance, then we could compare that to stream flow by watershed to say, okay, if you're pulling out 20 million gallons collectively from domestic wells and community wells, and you've got X million gallons of flow in this watershed in your creeks, here's what that impact is on reducing flow. So it's not difficult to do. It can be done with a study.
And I think it's important I think the reason why Saluda looked at and why it's important for us is because we really do concentrate on groundwater.
Right.
Yeah,
and we haven't here either.
Yeah, that's why I said on both groups, we never really did. So to give us some background information as to what the effect would be if those wells went dry and they had to go into municipal. Or what the total impact on our surface water would be if those wells went dry.
Okay.
I was okay with that. Keep it.
Okay, everybody else okay keeping that? Okay, we'll keep it. Okay. Group 3, did you have anything else? Nope. All right. Okay, in group 4, we already talked. What was that?
Easy. I said everybody took our thunder. Thank you, made it easy.
Group 4, we already talked about their 4. Let me just quickly look at some of these really quick because they were identified in the broad and, well, this one's just the broad. The broad had one about future, well, you've already got one kind of touches on that. Yeah, future uncertainty. So that's kind of covered. Funding mechanisms for stream gauges, we kind of talked about that.
So on the first one for number 4, I must have missed when we voted, but just to be clear on that one, it wasn't the 100-year to 5,000-year floodplain. It was not necessary. It wasn't to change the regulatory structure. It was just to change the data that's available. I don't know if that changes people's votes on it, but just to say that there should be a place where people can find 200 and 500-year floodplain, because clearly 100 years is more than 100 years now.
Okay, to be able to find the 200, 500, 1,000 year, it has to have been identified, and John, no, that's been identified probably, right? I don't think so. Yeah, John's saying no. In South Carolina, at least, they have not done any modeling to identify those longer or those higher duration.
There's lots of places where they haven't even done the 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that should be done.
Okay. So it should be done and should be publicly accessible is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that if a municipality wanted to say, hey, our 100-year floodplain is flooding on a regular basis, we want to set something that's different. Or if people want to make a more informed decision, they could when developing their houses.
We can reword this a little bit. I'm just trying to add to your point that it needs to be made publicly accessible if it's done.
What information is not, it's hard to get sometimes. In Charleston, for instance, you don't know if your house has ever been flooded or not, stuff like that. And so it's the access to information about floods is tough.
Okay. Okay, there is one here, and is Alex Pellet still on, or?
Yep.
Alex, I'm surprised you didn't make a push for the presentation that you've given, I think, to 2 different RBCs at least, about the low-tech process-based approaches to stream restoration.
Yeah, I do enjoy giving that presentation. And I'll be giving it again at the Water Resource Conference coming up next week.
Great.
If the RBC wants to see or hear anything about that, be happy to provide that. I didn't want to inject my biases into our conversation. And I think, I'm glad Tanya spoke up to clarify that point, because she was unable to make the entire breakout group session. And looking back at that previous slide, I think there's something else that that kind of got missed through the edits, and I don't know how important it is, but I just wanted to say that the data uses and acquisition, that one started as a brief statement of we should use the data we have before we focus on spending money on new data. So there was that sort of before aspect that got edited out, I think, before I even passed it to y'all, that I noticed on this review. So I don't know. I just wanted to say that regarding the low tech process based, yeah, I think it can significantly reduce sedimentation. And the lowest tech and lowest cost is probably just letting the grass grow, because when that, when you turn from a few inches of lawn to, 12 inches or more of pasture, that has an incredible impact on the interception variable in the rainfall runoff equations. And so it's going to reduce storm flow. It can have an outsized impact that a lot of people could do, except that we regulate it so that you have to mow your lawn, and so that's just something to look at. The low tech stuff is just about putting sticks and stones into small creeks and how that can be helpful. So I don't know if y'all want a presentation on that, or if y'all want to consider that as they did in the broad, but.
Alex did a short presentation on this in the context of kind of sedimentation, basically. Sometimes spend a lot of money on stream restoration and helping prevent scour of streams, which is the source of sediment. And some of the research that Alex done focuses on these low-tech process-based approaches, basically akin to like beaver dams and that type of thing. And the broad kind of took it to heart and said, yeah, there's merit in that. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it makes sense. So if y'all want Alex to do a presentation, he can. It only takes 15 minutes, or you can go to the Water Resources Conference, right, Tom, and hear him there.
And if we decide to include it, it can be added, because we said minimizing stream bank erosion, blah, 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 through when we listed a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Perhaps that could be captured under that bullet, including further investigation, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we might consider adding it there. So I'll add that as a yellow bucket. Maybe we lump it in. Maybe in the meantime, what I'll do is at least I can send you Alex's slides from when he presented this before, and there's not a whole lot of them. So it can give you a gist of what he's talking about.
I just asked him if on his property, if they're doing some of that stuff.
That's what I was wondering too, but I don't want to get off too much in a tangent.
Yeah,
but
I just put a comment.
I can answer quickly. I got a lot more material in terms of downed trees, but as far as the stones that were placed in the river in my little creek of 20-acre watershed, they didn't really move. So, if you have the right size cobble, it's not going on a small watershed. It doesn't really matter how hard it rains. It's not really going anywhere.
Good. All right. Okay, y'all did a great job with technical recommendations. We only have a small handful to revisit at the next meeting. So I think I'm optimistic that when we meet again, we can turn through those and use most of the meeting to talk about policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations. So if we can, it's 11:42. I'd like to spend just 5 minutes introducing this. Kind of set the stage and give you some homework for next time. So the planning framework says that policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations can be proposed by the RBCs, and they might include modifications to state laws, regulations, ordinances, new ones, laws, regulations, ideas for recurring funding. That's why we've heard from Cleat about the EPD seed grant program, and that's why we talked about this AgWrap program. And then, restructuring groups or agencies or doing something different. So those are all on the table as topics for this category of recommendations. We had talked about a couple recommendations previously that were related to funding that I think fall more under policy. So I kind of moved them down here. We had already kind of yellow bucketed these. First one was the legislature should authorize recurring funding for state water planning activities, including river basin planning. Currently, nearly all the funding comes from the legislature. So, I mean, there's not a lot to that one, basically saying that you think water planning should continue to be funded. Is that still your thinking? You still want to put that as a recommendation? Okay.
Yeah,
Do you think it makes the point? Do you want to be more specific at all or leave it as is?
But it may differ from region to region about the needs for the planning, the risks for region to region. So some regions might require more planning than others, or more caution. And it's not an equal problem all over the state.
Yeah. Okay. We'll turn this one into a green bucket if everybody's okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll find the green, but well, I'll do that later. Next one. Well, we've got 5 minutes. Let's talk about it since we heard from Clete today. A grant program should be established to help support the implementation of the action strategies identified in each river basin plan. We mentioned the example of the seed grant program. What do you think after hearing that presentation? Do you think it sounds like it's useful? It's not needed? What thoughts?
Some local tweaks, I think it sounds great.
I think it sounds great too. If it's administered, and coach, if it's, if the administration costs more than the grants, then don't do it.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would. It's a
I
pretty simple
can't
program.
I just
Don't say that.
well, I was wondering about the $300,000 for the Georgia thing, and how much it cost us. The 300,000 is what I was thinking.
I like the fact that they've done it long enough that they recognize that they need to lower the percentage of the local match.
Yeah. Had a lesson learned there.
For I'm sure they're like us, the more rural, smaller population counties don't have the same funding sources that the bigger counties do. So I think that makes sense. I like it overall. I think the intent looked good. If we're gonna implement this, I think it kind of goes to the first one too. They thought this was important enough to start. I think it's important enough to fund it going forward.
I agree. Yeah.
I would expand the eligibility to include nonprofit entities being able to apply to it. I didn't see that as an option for the Georgia Seed Grant Program, and maybe it is. It's just not listed.
It is not. We have to work with a local government agency to get funding.
Tanya or Ashley, do any of the seed grants ever support ag-related activities?
They can. I'm trying to.
Well one.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
There's another one, Tanya. The one sponsored by the one with City of Augusta. I know they're doing kind of more so like metering with City of, it's I feel like it's more ag focused, but none are sticking out that's like totally. I'll go back and look at the list. One that
They've funded a bunch of rain gauges to build out, and then they've also funded monitors on a number of different ag wells. But the having to get a local government to be the applicant is a huge obstacle because they're not easy. It is a government grant, but that's been our biggest challenge is actually navigating through the local government staff versus meeting the obligations of the grant.
Well, so I mentioned that because I tried to explain last month about this North Carolina Ag Wrap program, which is specific for ag. And Daniel, I think I gave you some homework. Yeah.
I like where they're coming from, but I talked to a few other farmers about it, and we don't like the eligibility requirements. Once you went back and read the law, I don't know what they call it in North Carolina, but one of the Department of Environmental has to come out and do an entire study of your property, and you have to make changes per their request before you can get the the ag rep.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of people that I spoke to said they wouldn't be interested.
Because
And that's different
Yes.
than the requirements for EQIP.
And a state to state grant is kind of an artifice, isn't it? Really, it's just another thing to say, I want to qualify well. But when the state's giving another state agency money, in fact, or whatever it's source, it's just a place to evaluate it one more time before it goes out on some student script.
I guess what I'm getting at is if you know, you all like the idea of the seed grant program, I was, my concern was that, well, maybe it doesn't cover some of the things that ag likes to do, some of these specific water related things, like put in a poundment or a well to, you know, enhance your resiliency if your primary source dries up. And I wasn't sure if that's really covered by the seed grant program. Do you all envision in South Carolina, if you had some type of program, that it would be all encompassing? So it would include things that the ag rep covers.
NRCS does a lot of that stuff as well. They'll have federal grants to build impoundments or drill wells, or so I don't know if you could utilize both or if you have to pick one or the other, but I do know we already have those opportunities.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think there's already ample opportunity from NRCS and EQIP and those programs, maybe it's not needed. If you think, you know, there's opportunity for eligible farmers to get
But you
that.
double dip, is what I'm wondering.
I don't know, maybe Mac knows more about NRCS than I do. Maybe he can chime in.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know, it's leveraging. That's, you're back to leveraging the state resources with your federal resources.
There's a
And
possibility.
possibly of using the state resources as the local match for the federal resources.
So I think Daniel's right. I mean, we've got the EQIP program is one I'm familiar with, and we're more used to that, and it's probably something we're all comfortable with in ag. And you know, to get this how big a pot of money when you start casting the net so very wide, especially in a state like South Carolina, I don't know whether you're gonna find that kind of willingness, political willingness to put that much money out there. But that's just a off the cuff comment. But yeah, I mean, we've got programs, and like I say, they're not as, I don't mean to say restrictive, but they're, you know, just a lot of extra hoops where we do a practice. It's like Daniel saying, when you got to go back and look at the whole farm. I mean, we fence out stuff and build retention ponds and that kind of thing, or impoundment areas, heavy use areas. But when you start going and having to do a whole farm survey, that gets complicated.
Okay. Well, for now, let's leave this as is, and we'll do a final visit of it next month. You know, part of y'all homework is to review these before, and if you have suggested edits so we can finalize them next month, that's what we'll do. I'd like to, just for efficiency's sake, have the discussion next month on these policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations in the context of what the broad came up with, because they spent a couple meetings talking about these, and they came up with what I think are kind of good overarching ideas. They didn't get into the weeds because they saw that there's going to be disagreement if they started to try to get too specific with these concepts, so they kept them broad. The Saluda has kind of gotten into the weeds to some extent on these, and for better or for worse, there's some themes and elements that are important to them that they want to flesh out. But when we talk about these next month, we'll start with these big concepts, and if we can get consensus on them, that's great. Please review these before the next month and decide, do you agree with these? For example, the first one, it's all about reasonable use. And we can explain again what that means, but I think we've heard it a couple of times. If you all agree that, you know, reasonable use criteria should be applied to surface water withdrawals, then we can move on. Same thing about laws that need to be enforceable to be effective, not distinguishing between registrations and permits. Here's one about riparian buffer ordinance. This one, this one I think is fairly important because it adds emphasis to this river basin planning process. So look through those and ponder them, and hopefully we can have a pretty quick and efficient discussion about these at the next meeting. But Fair request? Okay. Last thing I want to touch on is chapter review schedule. Look, I messed these dates up too, because I just copied and pasted. This is 2024, this is 2025. You don't have a year and 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks to review everything. You're going to get chapter 4 in the next 2 weeks. That's a, I don't know, 15-page chapter, I think. 2 and 3 are the longest, they're the longer chapters. 5 and 6 are fairly long, but it's all kind of about modeling. Generally, we have not received a lot of comments on those chapters. I wouldn't expect a lot of comments from you all, but please read them. 8 is about drought management. That's a pretty short chapter that we've already discussed several meetings ago. That should be pretty quick to review. 7 is only a 2 or 3 page chapter that focuses on water management strategies that y'all have selected, and you all didn't need to really identify specific ones to mitigate or reduce a shortage, because we didn't really identify shortages. So that's why that chapter is going to be pretty easy to review. And then December, we're going to give you chapter 9, which is all these recommendations we've been discussing the last couple of meetings, and we'll finish next meeting. And that one will take some thought to review to make sure we accurately reflected your ideas and opinions and recommendations. And then finally, chapter 10 is the implementation plan. And as we work on that in probably starting next month and in December, we'll have a final version of that ready for you in January to review. And then in February, expect to get a full draft and the executive summary, which in the other basins, it's been a 25, at most 30-page kind of glossy pictorial summary of the plan. In that regard, if any of you have pictures that you think would be useful in our executive summary that depict water resources of the basin or things that rely on water resources of the basin, I'd like to have them. We didn't do a lot of field trips. We only did 2 for this RVC, so the photos that we have are a little limited. So I'd love to have any photos that you don't mind sharing, and I'll give you photo credit for it in the plan. I think ag is something I don't have much of, so Daniel, if you want to send me some ag photos, livestock, whatever.
We can do that. We'll go over the dam, we got that one.
Yeah, I got some of the dams and everything, but if you'll have any photos that are especially important to you or highlight an important component of the resources of the basin, I'd like to have them. Just email them to me. Any questions about this chapter review schedule? Okay. John Haynes has already reviewed yesterday, chapter 2. He sent it to me at 10:15 last night, so he gets the gold star for the quickest review ever.
I'm sorry, you suck up.
All right.
I got this thing attachment to an email. I started reading it, so I'm just going to go ahead and knock this thing out.
Good job. Okay, we've already talked about this, but again, next month, before we jump into the recommendations, we will present a little bit of modeling that Amy Shaw has been doing based on the sedimentation rates that the Army Corps has developed. So we'll present that. It'll only take 15 minutes or so. And then we'll jump back into the recommendations. If we get comments we should get comments from you from chapters 2, 3, and 4 by next month. And if there's any really big items that we need to address, we'll leave some time on the agenda to discuss those. Typically, there haven't been. They've been easy to address. So I'm not planning to leave a lot of time for that. And then there's our look ahead, which we talked about at the first part of the meeting. Implementation plan in December and January, and then just finishing everything out. We'll be doing 2 public meetings, one hopefully around March, and then one hopefully around May. And we encourage you all to attend those as you can. In fact, we'd like you to do the presentations at those public meetings as much as you can. So like in the Broad, there was 4 or 5 different RVC members that presented. Same thing in the Edisto. I think there was 2 or 3 members that presented. So keep that in mind. Anything else, actually?
I don't think so. I guess we'll, did we want to
touch on how we'll do next meetings. If you guys like the same format like we did today, or we start as a large group and then break it in there.
You guys work well as small groups. That worked well for the technical stuff. I think that was a way to efficiently the process. The policy, regulatory, and legislative, it's a much more condensed set. You want to talk about those as a large group, or would you prefer to break out in small groups?
I don't know. I vote large group.
Yeah.
We can maybe start there, and if we feel like there's more to discuss, we can. Okay.
Yeah.
It's up to you guys.
We'll plan on a large group discussion then. Jill, anything else?
No, I don't think so. Thank you all for all your brain power today. I saw you made some great leaps and bounds, and I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I appreciate that all of our diversity and the dialogue we have is thank you.
Tom, you want to do a final plug for the Water Resource Conference next week?
Yeah, our South Carolina Water Resources Conference every 2 years in Columbia, Mount Metropolitan Center, the 16th and the 17th.
Scott has a presentation, update on the water planning process at the South Carolina Water Resources Conference, right?
Katie, you've got a presentation.
Katie has one. What's yours on?
Looking at watershed-based planning and land conservation. Prioritizing landfill protection.
Good. All right. Adjourn us.
I think, do I need a motion to adjourn?
So
Have we done that before?
Sometimes we
There we go. Adjourn.
all right. Thank you, everyone.
It's formality. I find that with my own board meetings, I sometimes forget to adjourn. You know, I get to the bottom, like.